Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Water Matters. This is the Smithsonian Online Conference Series brought to you by Smithsonian, Microsoft Partners in Learning, and taking it global. And we are really pleased to see so many people joining us from around the planet today to explore and talk about something that is part of all of our lives, something that unites all of us and connects all of us, and that, of course, is water. And today is the first of 3 conferences that will explore issues related to water, and we're going to be starting with water questions. And that is actually an invitation to you as well, because we would love to hear from you and hear your questions as we go along over the next couple of days as we explore water questions. Those questions include yours, and one way to ask your questions as we go along will be to use the chat area on the left side of the screen. So we hope you will do that. I'll give you a sense as to where we're going and where we're headed today, so you'll know when it might be a good time to think about the questions you have. But as they occur, you are welcome to enter them in the chat box on the left. My name is Jonathan Finkelstein, and I'll be here together with my colleague Adam Lafacci, working with these amazing Smithsonian guests who are with us to entertain your questions and to hear from them and to take great advantage of the time that they have here to share with all of us today. By the way, I also wanted to point out that our session today is being closed captioned, so you are actually seeing real-time closed captions appearing on your screen, thanks to our friends up in Boston at WGBH. So feel free, if you are enjoying seeing those captions coming up in real time, you can leave them right where they are. If for any reason you'd like to turn them off at any time, there's a little pull-down menu on the right. I'm showing you with a little red arrow. You are welcome to click on the option that says no captions, so you can turn those on or off as needed throughout the day today. So thank you. We're glad you're all here. Let me just give you a quick sense as to how our day will unfold. Our agenda for the day includes Nancy Knowlton, who is sitting right here with me. We're then going to hear from some colleagues at the National Zoological Park, also known as the National Zoo. And Douglas Herman will be joining us from not far from where we are today. He'll be coming across from the National Museum of the American Indian. And Jeff Place will be joining us from the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage and Smithsonian Folkways. And we'll be wrapping up the day with some music that will not long be forgotten. So you will enjoy that session to cap off the day. And then don't forget, we'll be back tomorrow with 3 more live online sessions, including sessions from the National Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, or CERC, and the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, the Smithsonian Museum located up in New York. So we'll be really covering all different disciplines and how different people with different perspectives approach the issue of water. And we hope you will join us for all of those events. Thank you to everyone who's chiming in on the chat area on the left, greeting us from all over. We are delighted. And on behalf of the partners for the Shout Learning Project, which of course you can learn more about at shoutlearning.org, I'd like to welcome you. So I'm going to go ahead now, and we'll be back, by the way, at the end to give you some follow-ups, some things that you can do to keep connected, and then we'll take a short break of a few minutes before we go to our next session. We've got some people, by the way, here who are enjoying twittering about the event. If you are, take note, Shout Learning is the Twitter feed for the Shout project, and you can certainly include that as your hashtag so we can keep track of your dialogue there. And you can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/shoutlearning. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Nancy Knowlton, who's the Sant Chair of Marine Science at the National Museum of Natural History. She is not a stranger to the Smithsonian Online Conference Series. For those of you who were part of the conference that we did on climate change, Nancy appeared during that session for a very popular talk, and she's back again to introduce Water Matters and Water Questions with Planet Water. What can we do for the health of our salt, watery world? Nancy, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to see all these different participants from all over the world, Panama, Pakistan, the United States, Canada, and lots of other places as well. So welcome to this session. And let's start off just with a very basic question. So my title of my talk is Planet Water. What can we do for the health of our saltwatery world? And I'd like to ask those of you out there, how much of the water on our world do you think is in fact salty? We've got one answer 70%, another one more than 95%. I'll wait just a few minutes and then I'll give you the answer. And all right, well, I'll give you a clue for those of you who haven't answered yet. 70% of the surface of the planet, over 70% of the surface of the planet is covered with salt water. So that might boost up some of the higher numbers a bit. Okay, well, I'm going to give you the answer now. The answer is, in fact, more than 95%. In fact, 97% of all the water on the planet is salt water. 2% is locked up in the glaciers, and only 1% is the kind of fresh water that we all depend on a regular basis for drinking and other things in our daily lives. So that's why I wanted to focus on salt water today, because it is such a big part of the water that lives on the planet. And of course, it's no accident. You can see me in the picture standing there in front of saltwater. I'm a saltwater biologist, if you will, and so it's something I know quite a lot about, and also it's something that I really care about. So let's go to the next slide, and we see here a picture of a place that some of you may recognize, particularly if you look off at the left edge, in sort of in the center, you'll see a very famous building. That's the Sydney Opera House. So this is a picture of a part of Sydney, Australia, and it comes with a question: what percentage of the world's population lives near the coast? So we already know that 97% of the water is salty. What percentage of the world's population lives near the coast? Getting lots of answers here.
There are.
Coming in fast and furious. Righty. The answer to that question is about half the world's population lives within 200 kilometers or 120 miles of the coast. And as you can see from this next slide, which actually I took myself on a beach in Indonesia, a lot of the people that live near the coast not only just enjoy it for its scenic beauty, but actually depend on it for food. Those are all fishing boats that you see there in this image, and also for jobs. There is a lot of tourism associated with coastal communities around the world. So the coasts and the water that is next to the coast is incredibly important for people around the world. And that's why a healthy ocean, which is really the subject of today's talk, is so important. Now, I'm going to start off with a little bit of information about why we should be worrying about the health of the ocean. And here you see a kind of diagram of the planet, which we're looking at sort of one of the oceany sides of the planet, the Pacific Ocean. And the problem that those of us who study the ocean, the problem that we've been concerned with is the fact that a combination of natural disturbance, but in particular the activities of people, have really led the ocean to a point where it's in a crisis state with respect to its health. And when you think about what's causing that crisis, you can think about what we're putting into the ocean, which is that list of things on the left, and what we're taking out of the ocean, which is a list of things. That's one thing that's listed on the right. So in terms of what we're putting into the ocean, we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that also dissolves in the ocean. We're putting nutrients in the ocean, toxic materials, sediments, that's mud and dirt, washing from the land into the ocean. And then we're also putting species from one place in the ocean and bringing them and putting them to other places in the ocean. And sometimes that causes problems when these alien species invade other places. And then in terms of what we're taking out everything bigger than about a couple of inches, 5 centimeters long. So we're doing, in a way, we're doing a giant experiment on planet ocean. I like to think of it as planet ocean instead of planet Earth, since it is mostly ocean. And we're putting all this stuff into it, and we're taking all this stuff out of it. As a consequence, it's perhaps not too surprising that the ocean has been suffering as a consequence. It used to be thought that the ocean was so big that people could do nothing to disturb it, but we've unfortunately learned in the last several decades that that is not the case. And so I'll give you some examples now. Now, the first example is a very personal example. This is a picture I took quite a long time ago at this point when I was a student studying for my PhD degree, my doctorate in marine biology. And I took it on the north coast of Jamaica in Discovery Bay. And what you can see there is how the reefs used to look when I first began studying them. Now, everything you can see, for those of you who aren't used to swimming over coral reefs, which is probably most of you, everything you can see there on the bottom, all those branches and that big head-like thing in the sort of center left of the field and the bushy thing at the sort of bottom left um, center of the field, all of that's living coral. In fact, about 70% of the bottom in Jamaica was covered with living coral. Now, we knew these reefs weren't in perfect condition because the thing that's missing from this photograph, by and large, are fish. You can see a few fish in the upper right-hand corner, but those are really small fish. They're only a few centimeters, a couple of inches long, and 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 a healthy reef, as you'll see a little bit later in this talk, really should have a lot more fish. So we knew there were problems with fishing, but we thought the reefs were in great condition, and we had no reason to suspect that anything was going to change. That, unfortunately, was not a good assumption because within about 10 years, those reefs that I studied as a student were gone. And instead of living coral, they were covered with seaweeds. And recently, it's been suggested that about 1/3 of all the corals that build these beautiful environments called coral reefs are at risk of extinction because of a combination of climate change and the local impacts, some of which I listed for you in that previous slide, things like um, overfishing on that, taking things out, and then the bad things that we're putting into the ocean. And in fact, in the Caribbean, where Jamaica is located, we've lost about 80% of all the living coral since I started studying them in the 1970s. So it's been a really dramatic and catastrophic loss of corals that sadly I personally have watched in the course of my career. And that, I think that's part of why I, I speak with such passion about what's going on with the world's ocean, because I've actually seen it myself with my own eyes. But of course, it's not just limited to coral reefs. Here we see a graph of what fisheries used to look like in 1900. So that's essentially the weight of the amount of fish being taken out of the ocean in 1900. And red is for more than 11 tons per square kilometer. It's a little bit hard to sort of get a handle on what that means, but let's put it this way, it's a lot of fish. And so you can see from this graph that in fact large parts of this is the North Atlantic Ocean that you can see here with the United States on the left and Europe on the right, large parts of that body of water had quite a lot of fishing, very successful fishing taking place. But if you move from 1900 to 2000, that's where we are. So you can see we've catastrophically overfished the North Atlantic to the point where now there's either no fish left or less than 3 tons per square kilometer. So it's a dramatic decline from many places that were up here down to places that are more like that. So I'll go back again so you can see this. This is 1900, 2000, 1900, 2000. And so as a consequence, what's happened when you've taken out so much fish, people estimate, in fact, that we've removed about 90% of the big fish in the ocean. What happens is that those fish are gone, and what we have left is jellyfish. So you see here pictures of fishermen with nets, and that silvery stuff in their nets it's not fish, it's jellyfish. And in some parts of the world, jellyfish are now the most common thing that you pull out of the ocean when you try to go fishing, which is good if you really like to eat jellyfish, but there are a lot of people who would also like to eat at least some fish, and so this is a big problem. Then there are these, as I mentioned, these species that have brought from one place and put in another place and become invasive. And here you see a wonderful picture of something that has been called in a great book called killer algae. It sounds really like a horror movie. And in fact, for the organisms that live on the bottom, it is kind of a horror movie. These killer algae are covering the bottom throughout big parts of the Mediterranean, and in doing so are killing a lot of organisms that are very important. Actually, see here this little patch of grass right there. That's a very special kind of grass that lives in the Mediterranean. It's called Posidonia. And in fact, it was recently discovered discovered just a week or so ago that some of the patches of this grass are 80,000 years old, making them the oldest living organisms on the planet. And you can see this killer algae is kind of creeping in and covering it. So that's a big problem that we have in the world's oceans. And then we have this problem of, because of lots of nutrients being put in the water, things from fertilizers, for example, and sewage from people's homes, you get big blooms of these poisonous algae, which sometimes it's called the rise of slime. The idea being that these slimy, obnoxious, poisonous things are taking over the ocean. And you can see here a big bloom washing ashore in Florida, and you can be sure that the people that live in these houses here are not too happy about this stuff that's washing ashore. And in fact, it can cause a lot of medical problems. So it's a really serious issue with ocean health as well, and one that affects not only the health of oceans, but the health of people.
Nancy, there's a quick question I just wanted to comment, and I was wondering if you could reflect on it briefly. Marta mentioned how incredible it is, how delicate these ecosystems are. Would you characterize the ecosystems as delicate, or in the cases that you're showing us, has it reached some kind of a tipping point?
I would actually describe it as being a kind of tipping point phenomenon, because the ocean is, as we started this talk off, a very, very big place. So it does take quite a lot of changes to really make a difference. But because there are so many people on the planet now, and we're taking so much out of the ocean and put so much into the ocean, we actually have pushed a lot of these ocean ecosystems past a tipping point. And that's why you see these massive collapses of coral reefs and fish populations and the rise of these toxic algae and that sort of thing. So over geological time, over hundreds of millions of years, in fact, there have been times when the ocean has really changed drastically, but that's been due to really big changes in the chemistry of the ocean or the temperature of the ocean. And essentially, people are so abundant and their impact on the ocean is so large that we can act almost like a geological force, or like a meteorite, in terms of the impact that we've had on the world's oceans. And so finally, in terms of where we're headed, this is really a serious problem in terms of the carbon dioxide. As I mentioned, we put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and about somewhere between a quarter and a third of it actually gets dissolved in the ocean. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about global warming, and of course, having that much carbon dioxide does warm the atmosphere, and therefore it does warm the ocean. So the ocean is getting warmer. That means that a lot of the sea ice is melting, but also as the ocean gets warmer, it also expands. And so those two processes together have resulted in sea level rising. And then perhaps even worse over the long term is the fact that all this carbon dioxide in the ocean is actually changing the chemistry of the ocean and making it more acidic. And so as a consequence, we're really changing the fundamental characteristics of the ocean, which have been for a long time relatively stable. And so here you can see a plot of actually temperature. It's plotted in such a way that it's the degrees in centigrade, which are how scientists usually talk about temperature, degrees in centigrade from the average. And so you can see that from the year 1000 till about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the temperature was fairly stable. And then here we are today, and up here is where scientists think we're heading. And so the combination of these increasing temperatures combined with more acidic oceans are really pose big problems for a lot of marine organisms. And so these kind of global effects of human activities are already starting to have major impacts, and will soon surpass the impacts of things like overfishing and pollution in the water as we move into towards 2100, if we don't change the amount of carbon dioxide we put in the ocean. So needless to say, all of these trends have made people a little bit discouraged, and even scientists can get a bit discouraged, but when they see all of these essentially stories of bad news coming up all the time. And it's even picked up in the popular press. Here you see a cartoon, which is kind of gallows humor, if you will. It says, first, let's concentrate on water, then we'll worry about krill. Unfortunately, this is a picture that sometimes captures a sense of how we wait to the last minute to do something about a crisis. Of course, now people who work on the conservation of the ocean aren't really quite thinking along those lines. But it is true that even for a long time, conservation biologists have been focusing on what's going wrong. And as a consequence, the emphasis on what we can actually do to make things better has not been what it should be. And this was a meeting that I went to. It was called the International Marine Conservation Congress. And I took all the abstracts. Those are the brief summaries of everybody's talk. It was hundreds and about 600 talks, as I recall. Put all those abstracts into this wonderful program that you can get on the web. And it picks out the words that were most common in the talks that people were giving. And what you see here, of course, is that, the words like, of course, marine is going to be common because it's a meeting about the ocean ecosystems and conservation and species and management and fisheries and protected and spatial and research. And there are all these words, but there's only one word in that whole wordle, which is actually a good news word, and that's the word effective. And so when I started thinking about this, I thought, where are the words like recovery and success and benefit and improve? Because we've been working on ocean conservation for quite a long time, and those words should really be part of our conversation. And for this reason, I actually started a program called Beyond the Obituaries, which focuses on success stories in ocean conservation. And one thing I'd like to emphasize is this was a program that was inspired by students, because at the time I started this, I was teaching at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at a center called the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, which I helped start. And I realized that the students that we had in our program were sort of like medical students, and instead of their patients being humans, their patients was the planet and the ocean in this particular case. And so thinking of that analogy between people doctors and ocean doctors, it occurred to me that people doctors are not, when they go to medical school, they don't get trained to write obituaries. And yet I started to feel that all we were doing in terms of our students was training them to write obituaries of the ocean. I thought, well, we've got to do better than this. We need to start thinking about what's working and talk about that. And that's not to say that all the problems are solved, but we should at least recognize when something that we're doing is making a difference, and a positive difference. And so what I'd like to do for the rest of this talk is focus on some of the success stories instead of on all the doom and gloom. You have to understand the doom and gloom, which is why I started with some of those somewhat alarming statistics. But now I'd like to talk about what we're doing to make a difference. And so we'll talk about things like the banning of hunting of organisms and protection of different areas, and also the restoring of habitats.
And Nancy, I can tell you're making a number of our participants today very happy that this is the direction we're heading, and they are, it seems to be fans of this notion of Beyond the Obituaries. We had somebody who asked just moments before you made this transition to where we're headed now. She said that many of the people that we educate or work with feel so overwhelmed by all the issues that are facing the ocean, and she and others are eager to find out how people are addressing the solutions. And we also had someone point out that in your Wordle chart, it's interesting that conservation is in there, but recovery isn't. And maybe isn't it better to reverse the damage done? Is that possible at this point? So that's where we're headed.
Well, it sounds like some of you are thinking beyond faster than my talk is going. So I'll try to move very quickly from this situation where we have this tiny little word effective to situations where we really can talk about recovery and success. So what I'd like to do is talk to you about a number of success stories that I know about. These are not all of them, of course, but they're ones that I've been familiar with, and I've tried to bring them to the attention of other scientists and the public at large. And we'll begin with this picture of Monterey Bay. Now, we now think of Monterey Bay as this wonderful tourist area with beautiful seaside walks. You can see all these organisms in the background. But it didn't used to be like that a while ago. In fact, Monterey Bay was really a mess. It was just filled with disgusting fish guts because it was the center of a big cannery uh, industry, and then the fisheries collapsed. And so Monterey Bay was a wreck. But it has, in fact, gotten better. And this is, for those of you who are interested, there's a wonderful book written by Steve Palumbi and Carolyn Sotka called The Death and Life of Monterey Bay, Story of Revival. And one of the really interesting things about this story is that, and this is a theme I'll return to in a couple of different places, is that there was a mayor of Monterey who decided that it was really important to protect a certain part of the bay, and she fought without sleep practically to accomplish her goals to make Monterey Bay a healthy place. And in the end, she and those who followed her succeeded. And the reason I mention this is because it's important to realize that individuals can make a difference. So in terms of the comment that came in, what can you do? There are lots of things you can do, and we'll turn to a few more of them in just a second. But this is a wonderful success story where now Monterey Bay has a very diversified economic base. It's not just fisheries. A huge tourism source of income is from tourism, and it's just a beautiful place. So that's one example of a success story. And as I say, it's been really nicely described in this book, which some of you may want to read. Then I'd like to talk about another success story. This is a success story that was told by a conservation professional, a guy named Hoyt Peckham, and he works for the Grupo Tortuguero de las Californias in La Paz, Baja California, Mexico. And he gave a talk in one of my Beyond the Obituaries sessions, because I run these sessions where people are only allowed to talk about success stories, and so I'm drawing on some of their slides in the course of this presentation. So his presentation was saying goodbye to bycatch. So what did he do? He talked to fishermen who were working at this in La Paz and convinced them that they were having a huge negative impact on turtles. And as it turned out, and any one of these individual boats that you see here was actually killing as many turtles as the entire fishing fleet was allowed to kill in Hawaii. So they and in fact it was in a kind of crazy way, it made them think there was no problem, because they thought, well, kill so many turtles, there got to be plenty of turtles in the ocean. Well, he worked tirelessly with these fishermen, teaching them how to avoid catching turtles. He also engaged them in the science, a kind of citizen science project. He had them help tag turtles to see where they go. In fact, there's this wonderful quote from one of the fishermen that says, if I had a lot of live turtles go into my kitchen, he said, but I've never had a live turtle leave my kitchen. So he was really enchanted by the process of helping with the tagging. And this is an example where the amount of bycatch, that is the accidental killing of turtles in the context of people fishing with nets. What happens is they get trapped, of course, in these nets and they drown. The amount of bycatch is really going down as a consequence of the efforts of Hoyt Peckham and this Grupo Tortuguero. So another success story is actually on the coast of Southern California. And this is a story that was told by Jen Cassell at the University of California in Santa Barbara. And it turns out big apex predators are actually coming back in Southern California. And who would have thought, because the number of people living in California, the number of people right on the coast is really large. And so it's not the place that you necessarily expect to have a lot of success stories in conservation, just because the pressure of people on the coast is so huge. But it turned out that a few important changes with respect to the rules that govern how you can fish, in particular the kinds of equipment you can use to catch fish as near shore, has allowed big predators, including sharks, to make a comeback in Southern California. And so that's another success story right here in the United States. The third one was a story that was told by Ram Lipschitz, and he's at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, and he works on the Chesapeake Bay, which is one of the big bays, what we call an estuary, a kind of mixture of fresh and salt water here on the East Coast, not too far from where I'm speaking. And he works on both the blue crabs and the oysters. And Chesapeake Bay used to be a vibrant living ecosystem, but over the years, for a variety of reasons, the oysters, for example, have all died out. The crabs numbers have collapsed. And so it was really in very, very bad shape. And what he discovered, and this was an example of an individual scientist making a key discovery, he discovered some of the key steps you need to take in order to make a difference. And I'll tell you just the one story about the oysters. For a long time, people have been planting little clumps of oysters here and there and hoping to get them to grow back. And what happened was they always got covered with mud and died. And so all this money and effort trying to restore the oysters of Chesapeake Bay were essentially failures. And what he realized is that if you want to have a success, you have to do it on a big scale. And so he created these small mountains of oysters, and lo and behold, instead of getting covered with mud and dying, they actually survived and they started making baby oysters. And he's had enormous success in restoring parts of Chesapeake Bay with respect to the oyster population. And he's had similar successes with respect to the blue crabs as well. So it's another success story. And then we have a story that was told to me by Nick Dalby. Now, he's at Simon Fraser University. I know we have at least a couple of Canadians there in the audience out there, so I have a couple of Canadian stories to tell you, actually. And he's a professor at Simon Fraser, and he teaches a course in conservation biology. And in one of these Beyond the Obituary sessions, he told this amazing story about how he's totally changed how he teaches conservation. And instead of giving students papers to write and tests to take, and some of you students out there may like his solution, he stands up in front of his class and says, okay, your assignment for this class is to go out and make a difference. And I think that's a wonderful assignment for a conservation class. And he had a big impact on the student named Claudia Lee, who you see up there. And she was actually not a biology student, she was a business student. And in fact, she initially was somewhat skeptical that sharks, the problem with sharks is a real one. Now, sharks are in trouble for a couple of reasons. One is that their fins are very valuable because people put, particularly in Chinese celebratory meals like weddings, it's traditional to serve shark fin soup. And so sharks' fins have become extremely valuable, which puts a lot of pressure on them because people want to earn money and then therefore go out and kill the sharks and cut off the fins. And the other problem is that they don't reproduce very fast. So between the high demand and their slow ability to recover, there's a huge problem with sharks. And so she started this organization called Shark Truth, and she directed her message to wedding couples, and she got them to pledge that they would not serve shark fin soup at their weddings. And in fact, the winning couple actually gets a free honeymoon. And so as she says in her website, she's prevented the serving of about 9,500 bowls of shark fin soup, or about 950 sharks. And she estimates that every table in a banquet, like you have a wedding, big banquet table, every table, if you serve shark fin soup, that table is essentially killing one shark. And so every table in a wedding that doesn't serve shark fin soup is one shark that's saved. And in fact, this whole movement to protect sharks has really taken off, and there are whole new bans now that are appearing in Central America, the Dominican Republic, Palau, and California on shark finning. And one of the interesting things about that is in some places, like in Palau, for example, it turns out that sharks, even though shark fins are incredibly valuable, the tourist industry, the amount people are willing to pay to see living sharks, makes living sharks actually much, much more valuable even than the shark fins, which are themselves pretty valuable. And so the whole economics of sharks and shark finnings is really now taking a turn for the better.
What an amazing story, Nancy, of somebody noting a problem, looking into it a little more deeply, and then doing something that overlays in people's communities in terms of a change they could make and turning a celebration into some kind of action they can do to make lives better ultimately. Amazing story.
Yeah, that's a number of the stories I've chosen deliberately because they reflect the successes of individuals who really care and want to make a difference. Because sometimes people say, oh, it's just such a big problem, I can't do anything. But in fact, if you look at the success stories we have, essentially any success story is driven initially by the energy and passion and hard work of individuals. So I'd like to open this to a question. I've told you some success stories, but I'd like to ask all of you in the audience if I've shown you that there have been some success stories, but have some ocean animals actually recovered their numbers as a function of these individual efforts? And if so, which ones do you think are doing best? So this is kind of an open-ended question.
Yeah, so please use the chat area on the left and tell us what you think. Have any um, ocean animals recovered? You can say yes or no, or just jump right in. If your answer is yes, tell us which ones you think have or that you know have. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to type in on the left-hand side.
In the meantime, are there any questions that I could address?
There are a few questions. One is you talked about the Chesapeake Bay recovery. Was there a book on that that you're aware of?
You know, there may be, but I don't have a title off the top of my head.
Okay, great.
I know the story from Monterey Bay has a great book, but there are definitely there are books written about Chesapeake Bay, but maybe we could send it as I'll look for some titles.
Absolutely.
And then we can post it on the Shout site.
Absolutely, as a related resource together with the recording. Here's a response coming into your question. This one is from Tracy, who says harbor seals in New England used to be highly threatened and are now so numerous that they may be viewed as a nuisance to some. It's a good example of trying to find a balance.
Excellent. That's a great example. And what I'm going to show you is the results of a study that was done by Heike Lotze. She's another Canadian. She works at Dalhousie University. And what she looked at was a different, how much organisms have declined from the numbers they used to have. That's what this term historical baseline means. So you have to, in order to figure out whether something is getting better, you have to know what the numbers used to be. And so she looked at the numbers that used to be for a number of different kinds of fish and sharks, and then also seals and otters, whales, sea turtles, and coastal birds. And so you see the worst situation is out here. So for example, if you look at these these are fish like salmon. These are fish that go between fresh and salt water. And so you can see here that those fish declined they lost about 95% of their numbers as a function of human activities. And in some cases, the recovery has not been that big. But here you look at and this is very relevant to the example about the seals. So the worst situation for seals was, again, a decline to about 95% of their original numbers. And now that decline, although it's not back to the original numbers, there's been a substantial recovery from about 95% decline to only about 75% decline. Similarly for whales, there are a lot of good news stories about whales. And in fact, here at the Natural History Museum where I work, we have a mascot, if you will, called Phoenix. And she's a North Atlantic right whale. And North Atlantic right whales were hugely overhunted. In fact, the name right whale comes from the language of whalers who felt that this kind of whale was the right whale to hunt because it floated when it was dying, and so it was easy to pick up and bring on board the ship. And as a consequence, their numbers really declined. And then more recently, the problem is that they tend to move back and forth in shipping lanes where they're very likely to be hit by big ships and die as a consequence. Well, their numbers are actually also coming back. And we just got word at the Natural History Museum that Phoenix, which is our mascot, just had a new baby. I think it's her 4th baby. And so whales are coming back. And to some extent, coastal birds are coming back as well. You see here from a little bit above 90% decline to down recovery back to about 80-some-odd% decline. Coastal birds used to be terribly impacted, among other things, because women like to wear their feathers in their hats. So this is a nice study. It shows that we've got a long way to go. There are lots of cases where there's been little or no recovery. But what these white bars show is that when people change what they do, when they stop killing, for example, whales or coastal birds, then the numbers do bounce back, which means that we create a policy and enforce it to protect these organisms. They are capable of coming back in numbers.
And Nancy, by the way, there have been some more thoughts shared from all of our community members today. One is from Srinivasan from India, who says that I've seen less toxic algae in the Bay of Bengal.
That's a great example.
And also, Mariam from Rawalpindi, Pakistan says in Pakistan we don't have any whales in our sea in Pakistan. Um, and Srinivasan follows up, have you any toxic flagellate samples at your center?
I don't, but because that's not what I work on. I tend to work on coral reefs, but I can take a look and find out where the best places to contact for toxic centers, toxic algae is. I'm quite sure there's a big group in the University of California, I believe in Santa Cruz. I'll get that information and provide it later. So here's a nice picture of the Northern Line Islands. These are interesting because two of them belong to the United States and two belong to the Kiribati Republic. And the ones that belong to the United States have very few people. And what's interesting about them is they also have lots of coral, which you see here, and lots of really big fish and sharks. And in fact, when you swim in the waters of the protected waters of the Northern Line Islands, about 80% of the living fish and sharks are top predators. It's almost like having 10 lions for every antelope in the Serengeti in Africa. And in fact, this was so surprising initially that people thought it was impossible. It turns out in a healthy ocean ecosystem that this is the norm, having large numbers of big fish. And it's only because we've eaten so many of the big fish that we thought that this kind of situation shown down here below with very little fish in the water and of course not too much in the way of live coral here either is the norm. So this really is a very, very clear indication that protection works. And that's important because particularly in the context of climate change and other aspects of climate change and ocean acidification, it's really important to know that for the time being, we can buy some valuable time by reducing local stressors. And we will have to deal with the carbon dioxide problem soon, but whatever we can do to reduce local stress is also a really good thing, and it's not hopeless. And then we have here we have a wonderful story of Cabo Pulmo National Park in Mexico. This is a park that was started by just one family in a small fishing village here at the tip of Baja California, and uh, and they just decided that they'd seen their fishing the, the amount of fish they got for all the work they were doing go down and down and down. And they talked to some scientists, and they'd also talked to tourists who said they'd really like to see live fish. And so they set up a marine protected area. And a little over a decade later, this is now the most successful marine protected area, uh, arguably in the world, where the place is just loaded with fish. And this was just a single family that made this huge difference, which is now, and this place is now received worldwide attention because of the success of this marine protected area. So I hope I've given you some inspiration as to what a difference other people have made. So I'd like to again open this up to some sort of open-ended question. What have some of you done to make a difference, or what could you do? Did you get any ideas from some of the examples that I've shared with you?
So we would love to see your comments and ideas and things you've done or think that you could do. You saw some great examples of people who come from many different backgrounds, understanding what the issues are and then taking action. So we would love to hear your thoughts. We did have a question. If we have some learners who are here who uh, don't directly live on the coast or near the oceans, and they're curious, what role does river pollution play in, and how does it affect the ocean, and what can people do who live near certain rivers?
That is a great question. For example, in the United States, the Mississippi drains about a third of all the land in the United States. And at the mouth of the Mississippi, each year, a giant dead zone forms, which is a place which has so little oxygen that almost nothing but bacteria can live in it. And that is caused by the fact that you get all this fertilizer and nutrients running off the land into the little tiny rivers, the bigger rivers, and the bigger rivers that feed into the Mississippi. And then they go down the Mississippi and wind up in the Gulf of Mexico, and they stimulate this huge growth of algae, and then they overgrow their resources and die, and the bacteria attack them, and you wind up with no oxygen in the water, and nothing else can live there. And there are dead zones. This dead zone is very large. It's about the used to be the size of New Jersey, roughly. It's a big patch of essentially yucky, horrible, oxygen-free water. And dead zones like that occur all along the coasts of all the continents in the United States except for Antarctica. Anywhere there are big rivers, big concentrations of people in cities around harbors, you get dead zones forming. So anybody who lives next to a river, which is a lot of people, of course, can reduce the amount of sewage that goes into the river and an amount of nutrients and fertilizer, all those things. If you reduce that kind of pollution wherever you live, that ultimately that pollution winds up in the ocean. So if you reduce the amount of pollution, then you reduce the threats to the ocean that are posed by these huge dead zones, which every year get more and more common. I think the last I heard there was about 450 of them around the world. Also, those of you who use bags, for example, plastic bags, many of them wind up in the ocean, and other pieces of plastic form this giant, what's called a giant garbage patch. Of course, it's not really a patch that you can walk on, but there are big places in the ocean where all this garbage accumulates. And the big problem is that the seabirds that feed their young on ocean life wind up picking up all this garbage and feeding their babies, and you wind up in places like the Northwest Hawaiian Islands where the albatrosses are these magnificent seabirds. You find all these dead baby albatrosses, and you open them up, and their stomachs are full of things like cigarette lighters and all sorts of pieces of plastic. And then finally, everyone on the planet uses some amount of energy, and that energy is released into the burning of that fossil fuels, for example, is the release as carbon dioxide. And so anything that anybody can do to use energy efficiently and use kinds of energy which don't release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere makes a huge difference to the ultimate health of the ocean. So there is a ton that you all can do even if you don't live anywhere near the coast at all.
It's fantastic, and we're seeing things about speaking up and taking action when you find out about people who are flushing prescriptions and medicines down the toilet, for example. Thank you to Christine and those with you in Saratoga. There was a brief discussion earlier about labeling systems in terms of sustainable fish. Any of those that are particularly good or working, or ideas for people there?
Yeah, there are a number of different labeling systems, and I'll get some of those up on the Shout website for you because I'd like to present all of them. They are very good sources of information in terms of telling you which fish are caught sustainably and which fish are not. In general, it's good to eat fish that are low down in the food chain, but these different telephone applications and also websites will give you a lot of information. So we're getting close to the end of this talk, and I'd like to say thank you all for listening. I put up two resources for you. One is the Ocean Portal, which you can follow on Facebook and also on Twitter at Ocean Portal. And I believe the teacher preparation lecture provides a very, very nice guided tour of the Ocean Portal. And then I'd also like to tell you about the book that I wrote called Citizens of the Sea. And you can follow the news that I find about the Citizens of the Sea at Sea Citizens on Twitter as well. So both of those are good resources for you. And I'll be posting on the Shout website some additional resources that reflect the questions that I was asked that I couldn't give an immediate answer to. So again, thank you very, very much. It's been a huge pleasure being with you.
Nancy, that's very kind of you to do that follow-up, and especially wonderful that you're here with us today. I just wanted to end with this great note from Clea in Aurora, Colorado, who says, to address the feeling of overwhelming depression, we can teach our students about interdependence and how we are all connected. And I think the examples you gave show indeed how we can make a difference through taking action. So fantastic. We thank you. We thank everyone for all their great ideas and questions and contributions. And we have a few minutes, but before we take our brief break, I'd love to introduce Ashley Naranjo from the Smithsonian here at the Center for Education and Museum Studies. And Ashley's got a few ideas about ways we can stay connected to the Shout project and to discussions like the one we're having today.
Thanks, Jonathan. So basically, I just wanted to kind of give everyone an idea of how to stay connected to the network. We have, obviously, Jonathan had mentioned at the beginning, the Twitter, which is Shout Learning. And then we also have the Facebook page, which allows for Smithsonian resources that you can incorporate in your classroom. Like Nancy said, the Ocean Portal is a great resource that, directly connects to her session. And then we also have weekly water activities, writing prompts. We kind of scour the entire internet to find related news resources as well, and kind of keep you up to date on all of the different sessions that are coming up.
And we have a new project that we should probably mention too, shouldn't we, Ashley? I'm going to go ahead and bring that up so you can say a few words about it.
Perfect, perfect. So new this year is actually the Smithsonian Badges program. And with this, your teachers can register for this, and their students have the ability to do supplementary activities, calls to action, and kind of apply the knowledge that they've learned within these sessions to, interdisciplinary activities, calls to action, and really kind of, like I said, extend the learning past just watching the sessions. Students can, create different types of projects based on this, and really get a feel for the virtual badges that we have here. As Jonathan's showing on the screen, there's an oral historian one, there's a dirt detective, and as we move throughout the sessions coming up in the next few months, we'll be able to add more, and so your students can go through each of these badges.
And as they earn them, the badges are theirs to keep. So for those of you who are students with us who participate, the badges that you earn for completing the quests that you'll go on will demonstrate to others that you care about these topics. You care about things like telling oral histories about how water ecosystems have changed from firsthand sources. And they'll also show that you've gotten your hands dirty and become a dirt detective, and so many more. So it's really a great way to let other people know what you've learned and how much you care about each of these topics. So for the teachers who are logged in with us today, we're going to go ahead and put a link up on the screen. We'll include this in our follow-up email to each of you as well. We'd love for you to consider signing up so that your students in your classes can take part in this ongoing program to earn digital badges. Great. Any other resources you'd like to share, Ashley?
Sure. One of our partners, Microsoft Partners in Learning Network, has a great network for educators that you can sign up, and we have the link posted there. They're also doing technology tutorials for teachers, and there's another link that's posted up there as well. So you can sign up for those. The next one highlights using Connect in your classroom. And then here's just a quick shot of the Microsoft Partners in Learning page, so you can see what it's like, and I believe you can log in using a Windows Live ID, Facebook, and different email accounts that you already have in use, and that way you can also highlight that you are a Shout educator.
Excellent. Well, we are going to take a brief break, Ashley, and thank you so much for highlighting those resources with us.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And we'll be back in about 5 minutes to introduce the next topic, which is It's Not Easy Being Amphibian, the importance of water. How does water quality and quantity relate to conserving amphibians in captivity in the wild? We're going to look at some amazing pictures and hear some amazing stories. You will probably never have learned so much about amphibians in one 50-minute stretch, and we hope you'll stick with us. We'll see you shortly. You can stay right where you are.